Hello and welcome to the Modern Ear podcast, where we take a look at classic and favorite albums. I'm Trevor.
I'm Barrick, and today we're talking about Marvin Gaye's What's Going On. The album was released on the 21st of May, 1971, so it's almost 50 years old, and it's more actual and more fitting to the time, which is very sad than maybe ever. We will go to that later. Trevor, you have the most modern ear you can imagine at home with your daughter Lillian, with 4 years. During the process of all that listening through the last weeks, what was her takes?
I actually listened to a lot of it when she was sleeping, so I wouldn't have to get complaining. But she's listened to it with me before, and I think she heard it like 2 or 3 times during the listening, and a lot of the time is kind of just background noise for her, but sometimes she'd be dancing with it. The one thing, the extremely modern ear, Harper, who is not even 1 yet, when Marvin Gaye would do his "ay, ay, ay," Harper would repeat it back, which was pretty funny.
So
he would do like his
already
little
have the
kind of
first
scatting things, and she would be repeating the little jazzy riffs that he was doing. She would be singing along with it.
So she providing the first good mood together with Marvin Gaye. That's quite good. And how was your first listening to that?
I was really surprised at how well it flowed all together. I didn't know that it was like this big concept album. That really was like, what song am I on now? I don't know what track this is. I would constantly have to look down and check. And I ended up buying after I'd listened to it the first time. I went out and actually bought the LP so I could actually have a listen to it in the form that it was made, so I could listen to side 1 and then side 2 afterwards and see what it was like. But it's crazy. And I really, one of the things I really liked was the book ending. The end of Inner City Blues is the beginning of What's Going On. I thought that was pretty cool.
I loved it. So that's a super boring take because I can relate to everything you just said. I also listened to it and I didn't even thought that this is an album, and it's like, this is a jam session, but a perfectly made jam session. It seems to me like that they're sitting together in the Snake Pit, what was called like in Motown, and they came into a constant flow and they just recorded it on one take. That was the feeling I had. Of course, it didn't happen that way, but it constantly going from one part to another. That how I felt when I listened to it first time. And I loved the ending. And the other thing is that it's not only sound like one take, also it's like a book from the lyrics. Even at the first listening, when you don't go deeper into the details and the meanings of the listening, you get a quite good feeling. It is really like he's telling a story, what's going on, and he's asking what's going on, and he's saying what's going on in his mind and his takes, and that is very thrilling.
Yeah.
This is an album where it's extremely interesting to just sit down and listen to it, because it's also a perfect album to just have it in the background. You have some guests, you are doing something at home, you have this nice warm sound, but on the opposite, these quite deep lyrics and sad lyrics. And this combination is quite powerful. And it really changes when you just sit down and listen to it and do nothing but listening to the album. That was also a take that I had, but the first listening. Can you relate to that?
Yeah. And what I actually had to laugh out a bit was a lot of the album is quite religious. I am not, but I grew up in a religious household, and I kept thinking, if this is what church music was like, I probably would still be in church. It's just fun and gets you moving. I thought it was interesting for like there's hardcore religious lyrics in it, and you don't even really notice it.
Yeah, especially for me, grown up in Germany, to think about this as church music is it's like a new world. Well, you're right. When you're listening to the lyrics or you're going deep into it, you say, well, that's could be running in a church, but how music here is that's totally different view on that. What else popped up to your mind and emotions or thoughts during the first listening before you made the deep dive?
I really liked the harmonization in all the songs. I was like, this is really, really cool. We'll get into that further in the deep dive because there's stuff behind that. But I kept thinking, wow, really, really, really nice harmonizing on the vocals. And I love the bass, but I like Motown, so I know who James Jamerson is. And I kind of figured that's who was playing bass for some of the tracks. I thought most of them. I thought all of them really, which didn't end up being the case, but you really notice, especially on side one of the LP, the Jameson is playing most of the bass.
And he was one of the most important musicians for Motown sound, right?
Yeah, he basically led the majority of the sessions. He's listed as the most underrated bass player of all time, which I found pretty interesting.
That's interesting that you said this. That did not occur to me in the first listening, but my brother yesterday mentioned it when I talked about him. Yeah, it's a very, the bass is very important. And then I read about it and I thought, oh, okay, he's the main guy for that. So he underlines this too. So I had that also later, the experience, not while listening, but I also thought it was quite interesting.
I also really liked the horn sections and like the orchestra feeling in a lot of the songs, which also makes sense when you deep dive into it. And just the blending that was, yeah, the blending between songs was amazing. It was just continuous, like you said, it was a story.
And that was a question that came up while first listening, if this blending were maybe super novel at the time. The only band I could imagine have done that were the Beatles in a totally different genre. I don't know if that was common for Motown, soul, R&B music at that time. I still figured out, but from your reaction, I think you know that it wasn't.
Not at all. That was the first one. And what did you have for any extra thoughts on the first listen?
Interestingly, I had to compare it to an album that doesn't make any sense to compare, and that was Nirvana's Nevermind, because of our process. And then the first thing was, wow, this album again starts just with that super massively hit. I mean, this whole album doesn't exist without the song What's Going On, but it starts with such a great song, and the rest of the album, the whole energy, so it sets the whole energy for all the album, as we said, about the tone, how it is flowing to each other, and that's stuck in my mind all the time. And another aha moment I had the first time was then when Mercy Mercy Me started. So till Mercy Mercy Me, it was for me still like,
Still what's going on?
yeah. And then, oh, this song was also on this album, and then it was like a little bit of shift, and it was, yeah, really constant riding the waves with it. And I don't know, I just was listening. That was also nice. I didn't have so much thoughts at the first listening. I was just kind of in that flow state.
I did make one note on Right On
Mm-hmm.
that I really, really liked the disco flute. Do you know disco flute?
No.
It's like the hardcore reverb flute that you hear in all disco music. I think it's the
Yeah.
funniest thing ever. I just call it disco flute. I think it's hilarious. I love it.
And I think this was recorded from a teenager from high school or something.
I have no idea. I didn't find anything about the disco flute.
I think I read just in 45 facts about what's going on that I think this instrument was played by some teenager. Great appearance. So any more takes from the first listening?
Just how relevant it is still, which listening to it, this is before everything that happened with in Minneapolis. I listened to the album and already thought, holy, how sad is it that an album that's 50 years old is still relevant?
Same take. Yeah.
like in the whole world, not just America, but considering it was made in Detroit, and it's still very, very relevant there. And it's just sad that it's still so relevant after almost 50 years.
It is super sad. And as you said, it's relevant for all over the world. I think especially right now for the US, especially also when you consider that Motown and Marvin Gaye are, big from Detroit, a city that has massively problems with all that stuff with racism and how big the gap is there. And I had the same thought. And as you mentioned, it was before all the horrible accidents of the last week, and then it became even darker.
And sadly more relevant.
Sadly, even more relevant, yeah. And of course, when we're going into this, it's not like, I think Will Smith said it this week, or he posted it. It's not like racism getting worse; it's just getting filmed. So it's basically no news, but it's hitting such strange and such sad areas right now, and everything that happens in US, that after that happening and listening to it again, it was hard to not to cry. I have to say, it's really strange. The song could be written this week after all that exists.
Totally. Yeah, totally.
As a reaction to what happening right now, Marvin Gaye could have wrote this song. And as you mentioned, it's 50 years ago, and that's very, very sad.
Shall we get into the deep dive?
I think so.
What was your most interesting fact that you found about the album?
I don't know the most, but the first one that stood out to me was that the boss of Motown Records,
Berry Gordy.
Yes, very powerful man at Motown. He was the main guy, did not want to release the song What's Going On. And the song What's Going On was released before the album was anyway recorded, and before it was decided that there is an album. That I also didn't know. And the reason, now we're going back to that topic, what he said he don't want to publish it is it's too controversial. And he never wanted to really have controversial albums because he thought it will not be commercially successful. And then there was the other guy who was also quite powerful at Motown, Harry Borg, who just pressed 100,000 copies without letting Berry Gordy know, and he released it. So he's a real hero. Without him, this album never happens.
Yeah.
And it immediately became an instant hit. Immediately. And then Berry Gordy changed his mind also abruptly, went to Marvin Gaye and said, well, okay, I was wrong about that. Make a whole album in that style. And Marvin Gaye was, what do you want from me? You didn't like that stuff you didn't want to publish. But as I read, Berry Gordy had a quite good feeling how Marvin Gaye is working, and he made a bet with him and said, well, I bet you will not be able to record an album for that song in 30 days. And he said, okay, I will do it.
Do you know how long it took them to record it?
No.
It was recorded in 10 days. And in sequence. So What's Happening, Brother was the first track recorded after What's Going On, and the final track was Inner City Blues. They went straight in sequence recording it, which is pretty cool.
And then the sound of the album and the flow make even more sense when you know this.
And do you know the trick of how they got the orchestra flow done properly?
No.
They actually gave the orchestra the whole album, and the orchestra, they listened to the album and they played while the album was playing, and they didn't stop playing in between tracks. They just kept playing. That's why it's so seamless. That was my most interesting fact from the album. I found that really, really interesting. So the orchestra was listening to the music and playing along to it and just kept playing. That's why it sounds like a suite.
That is a great one. And again, shows, I think most of the great albums are recorded in a quite short period of time. And this is a great example for that.
Another thing that I found interesting was that the drummer that plays on What's Going On, Chet Forrest, wasn't part of the Funk Brothers.
He wasn't.
No. Marvin wanted to not have the traditional Motown drum sound, so he brought in his own drummer.
Ah.
And the harmonizing that I was talking about before, did you hear about how that was done?
No.
It was a mistake. They accidentally threw Marvin's he recorded the vocals twice, the main vocals.
Yeah.
And they accidentally put them together into one track. And he was like, oh, I like that. Okay, let's keep it.
Perfect.
And he actually does a lot
Yeah.
of the background singing as well.
And also quite interesting for me was that Marvin Gaye was the producer.
Yeah.
Which we didn't mention at the beginning.
True.
So it was the first album where he had that kind of freedom in advance to the others, where a lot of other people, and especially you just mentioned Berry Gordy, had a lot of saying in that. So this is the most, till that point at least, the most personal album of Marvin Gaye, where he deals with all his internal struggle and that is going on with him.
Well, it was the album that he took control of his career, basically.
Yeah.
And decided, I'm doing this my way.
He would be anyway a big star, but this made him a super musician or legend. And Berry Gordy thought basically his take was, you will ruin your career when this happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, you already mentioned the Funk Brothers. Maybe I have to go a little bit into that, because if you're not really into that whole topic, you don't know about this legendary band. And the Funk Brothers, there are facts about them. They're one of my favorite music facts of all, especially as the Funk Brothers have more number one hits than the Beatles, Beach Boys, and the Stones together.
It's ridiculous. It's amazing. And no one knows who they are.
No.
More people know who they are now because of Standing in the Shadows of Motown, but still, not that many people know who the Funk Brothers are.
Which we recommend everybody to watch this after listening to that podcast. Standing in the Shadows of Motown from 2002. Great documentary.
Very, very good.
Yeah. What I also figured out, I forgot it, that the Funk Brothers for a long time they would not mention on the albums that they played the music.
This was the first album they actually got mentioned on.
Yeah, that's another big one.
Yeah. He even says in the liner notes and about the job of putting this son of a gun together, and then lists the band members. And that was the first time that it ever was done on a Motown record.
Can't imagine like a music buff in that time gets the album, said, oh, there's this new band, the Funk Brothers, Marvin Gaye, working on. I have to check them out. And then you're going deeper and figure out basically we're responsible for all the music from all the Motown hits.
That's another podcast for another time.
That
could be like a 2-episode special.
But we have to mention it. Yeah, we have to mention it when we're talking about this album and everything that comes with Motown. And what fits to that fact for me was also the information that the song and the lyrics originally were not written by Marvin Gaye from what's going on. That was also a new fact for me. Did you know that?
I didn't know that ahead of time either. No. What I read was the original lyrics were written by, what was it, one of the guys from the Four Tops?
Yeah, Obie Benson.
And then he said Marvin changed some of the lyrics to better suit himself, and that the Four Tops wouldn't perform it because it was, like Gordy said, too political.
But they heavily wanted that Marvin Gaye is working on it.
Yeah.
They were really talking to Marvin Gaye. It was very important to them that he used this. And this Obie Benson wrote it when he went off a bus in San Francisco, I think in 1969, and he saw police brutality against young people that are protesting against Vietnam and everything. And that's when he wrote that song. So sadly, as mentioned, this fits also quite to modern times.
Yeah.
What else was interesting for you in the process of the research? What else did you find out?
I also found out that my original thought of that James Jamerson played on the whole album was false. It was basically an even split between James Jamerson and Bob Bobbitt. Jamerson played What's Going On, What's Happening, Brother, Flying High, Save the Children, and God is Love. And then Bob Bobbitt played everything else. So Mercy, Mercy Me, Right On, Holy Holy, and Inner City Blues.
So really a clean split. between two guys with very cool names, by the way.
James Jamerson, yeah, true.
And Bob Bobbitt. Too cool.
Both of the Funk brothers.
Fits to what I also figured out when I was listening to the start of the Questlove session from The Roots. When I was sitting in the studio and listening to original recordings, and I wanted to hear the drums at the beginning, which is no surprise, as he's one of the greatest drummer ever. And he said, well, he was always so interested what happens if you put these drums that were quite novel for music in that times in front of it, that the sound would be totally different. And this I had in my mind when I re-listened at it. What will happen if you make, I don't know, the bass more dominant, which was anyway very dominant, or other instruments, or especially the drums. That was just very, very fun to think about it, even when I don't get a clear picture of that.
That was the big thing with the album, though, is that Marvin didn't want the typical Motown sound, which was very drum heavy. So that's why he had the drums pulled back.
Yeah, I also didn't know that, but I have to admit, in the research, I learned about it that the sound was also very untypical for Motown.
Yeah.
I know, of course, Motown sound. I didn't know that before I was reading about it. Did you know that?
That it was completely different than normal Motown?
Yeah.
No. I know the old Motown sound, but it didn't really register that this was directly after that. Like I didn't have the time frame in my mind of this is when this happened, this is when this happened, and this happened right after or at the same time as a lot of the Motown hits.
And it kind of also is the last big thing for Motown, right?
Well, they moved to Los Angeles, and then kind of the Funk Brothers basically broke up because they weren't jamming in Berry Gordy's basement every day. That's how the Motown sound got created, was having the same musicians playing over and over and over again every single day. They had been recording tracks without singers the whole time, so it would just be the Funk Brothers playing, and then they'd ship the track off and put a voice to it.
They created a lot of great music. I listened to other Motown stuff afterwards, but during the research, I understood why, or I got at least better feeling why what's going on was such a new thing.
Yeah.
So after that research, and then you put on the record again, and you're listening to the main song, what changed?
I listened to the strings differently afterwards
Because of Questlove.
because of the whole discussion of the strings being recorded all in basically in one go, just listening to the album and not really breaking between songs. I wanted to kind of catch that. And I then listened also to the bass to see if I could notice a difference between the two bass players.
And to use an orchestra like this was also a novel thing, as I understood.
Yeah, I don't think they did it that often before. What did you notice on your second listen?
The thing is, I heard it a couple of times afterwards, and actually I cannot really remember when that's how much I listened to before the accidents of Minneapolis. But afterwards, yeah, it was really about what he's singing about, and the feeling, and the line that stuck in my mind was "Father, Father, we don't have to escalate," which was a double meaning for him when we're recording, because at one side he's talking about God and said what's going on here in the world, and the other part was he was talking about his own father, who escalated quite often when he was young. He was quite violent, and even more sadly and ironically, Marvin Gaye died because of escalation of his father.
Yeah.
And this was just a line that I had so constantly in my mind, and even more at the second listening, especially for the first song, I thought how powerful this song is, because on one part you really almost cry because of what he's singing about, the violence, and don't punish me with brutality, and only if you just saw the pictures from what happening in police brutality in the US, especially against people of color. And on the other part, it's still a song that gives you hope, or at least for me. It is such a mix of both things that makes it so powerful.
That was the thing with the whole album. It's a critical album of society. Like it's very critical of society in general, but it looks at the positive things of humanity and not on the negative side. So it's still an uplifting album, even though it's kind of like a protest album.
Yes, and that's why it even more today would be the perfect album to release. Even powerful hip hop albums with certain kind of energy or not would not be the right soundtrack. I think this is the right soundtrack for that. And as you said, it is a necessary protest for now and for that times. But still, it has like this question and still this belief that humans can still overcome this, and let's find our own soul and core together. And I think you could not put this better into any piece of art than he did while I listened to it. That was by far the most striking feeling. So that was really just a feeling. It was not really that's something you think about in that moment.
Yeah.
And I especially had that also today again. That when I listened to it, and what fits quite good to that description is Questlove says at the beginning of the video he always imagined this album was recorded, or this song especially was recorded in the darkest day and the coldest day of winter. And the first that comes to my mind was, that's interesting. I thought it was a summer, and in the summer, people getting out of church. My brother yesterday also said that, and they were singing together. It's the sun. But when I think about it, I said it could totally be both.
I had the same feeling though as you. For me, it was more summer, like upbeat kind of. I didn't really get where Questlove was coming from with the darkest winter. But we also have different point of views. We're not African Americans, so
yeah, that's I think also a big part of that, and that was by far the most dominant feeling I had. And the other one was just what we said at the beginning. The ending was even better at the second listening. I don't know why. It doesn't have to do with any information I found during the deep dive or digging in. To hear that the last song, it was like the great ending of a movie or something. That was quite powerful for me.
Yeah. I found that I kept thinking of something you said during the last podcast when I was listening to it, of how you said that Nevermind was a collection of songs that you couldn't imagine these songs being something other than the album Nevermind. And this, I think, this album is even more so that, because it was made as this big concept album where they have to go together.
Absolutely. I think this is what's going on is the gateway to that, but that is such an album that belongs together. You have to listen to the full album, and you have to listen in that direction.
That's also the thing. If you look at the time it was made in the time when it was vinyl. It's not like you're skipping ahead to the next song. That's why I actually went out and bought the record, because I wanted to kind of listen to it the way that it was supposed to be listened to. Like how they had it in mind, where you listen to the first 6 songs, and so you listen to the first 6 songs and then have to turn it over, and if there's a distinct moment at the end of Mercy Mercy Me, we're like, yeah, those belong together, and then you flip it over and there's 3 songs left that take up the rest of the album, and those go together. They all fit together as an album, but then you even notice the side 1 and side 2 of the album fit together as their own little things as well, which was pretty cool, I found.
That is a great information because I had it written down. I know that you just got it on vinyl, and I want to ask how your listening was changing because of the vinyl, or if there's any changing. But that's, of course, one part, these side A, side B. So is there some other things that you mentioned or that you figured out while listening to vinyl that seemed differently?
No, that was the biggest thing. Like, it's not an original. I got a remastered, or not a remastered, but a reprint version.
Yeah, but the arrangements of the tracks of side A and side B are...
But it's just the arrangements that was the biggest thing, is that it actually fit with the 6 songs in the beginning and the 3 songs on side 2 all fitting together nicely, which I thought it was really cool. And then I love reading liner notes and everything in albums. I've always liked it since I was a kid. And last night I had actually stayed up late listening to a 1976 interview with Marvin. And I kept thinking, wow, this guy is really conceited. And then you read the liner notes and I'm like, yep, he is very conceited. He thinks very much of himself. Like, the opening is after some several days of reflecting and pondering and general thought, which is very unusual. I still can't think of a non-complimentary thing to write about myself.
Yeah, okay. That is a heavily self-involved take.
But he was good and he knew it, so
yeah, if
nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. So in art and with guys from sports, that's maybe something where it sometimes helps. I guess so. I have.
Speaking of sports, do you know Marvin's tie-in with the sports?
Yeah.
That he was going to try and out. He said he was going to try out for the Detroit Lions.
Yes.
If Berry Gordy wouldn't release the album.
And it was his big dream. He wanted to become a football player, but he was 31 at that time. So it sounds kind of crazy, but when you're, have such a big ego, maybe it makes sense.
He actually went to the tryouts. Like, there's pictures of him in the gear.
Yeah, but for the heavy tryouts, the coach won't let him because he was afraid, well, when we have a heavy tryout and he gets knocked down and his career is over, I'm the one that is responsible for that Marvin Gaye is making no more music. So I will not do that. And I appreciate that he didn't, because I know football is a heavy sport. And back then in the 70s, I guess it was a little bit harder with all that stuff you didn't know about that. But there are 2 guys from the Detroit Lions that have a chatter in one song that is recorded. So it's still
on What's Going On.
On What's Going It's What's Going On, right? I wasn't.
Yeah, at the very, very beginning of What's Going On.
Yeah.
Which was apparently for the single release in 1971. They took that and cut it out of the beginning, and in the middle of the song it happens again, and they cut that out and put it in the middle of the song and at the beginning of the song for the album version. So the single version just goes straight into the music and then has them talking in the middle.
You could make the argument that was the biggest achievement of the Detroit Lions in the last 50 years when you're a little bit into football. Sorry, Detroit Lion fans. And I forgot. I don't know if that changed the listening, but it's a very funny fact. But unfortunately, when I bring this up, your daughter cannot listen to the podcast. So, but I have to. And
I'll bleep it.
Yeah. It's not because of the wording, it's because of the story. As you mentioned, this album is so, it's sad, but it's still positive. And one description was, it is full of love, but completely out of lust. So there's no sexual vibe in it. And there is the story about that Marvin Gaye before recording went like for hours masturbating to get everything sexual out of his body, to just concentrate just on the love part of the soul. So I thought also that was quite funny. Are there other facts that had impact on your listening?
Not really on my listening, but just interesting things that I found about the album was that there was a possibility that that Marvin Gaye wouldn't even perform anymore before this album got made. Did you read about that one?
No. So perform as a live act
At
or
all.
perform at all?
At all. He wanted to quit music.
No, I didn't.
Because Tammy Terrell, who he did many, many duets with, died from a brain tumor.
He was one of his closest friends also.
Yeah, they were, the two of them did, I think they did Ain't No Mountain High Enough.
Yeah.
Together, and many, many other songs. And she died of a brain tumor, and it just set him off.
I only knew that he had a very dark time because of the death. I didn't know that it went so deep, and that he basically wanted to quit music. But that's quite often that this great art, and especially in music, came from very dark places. That's also something that Questlove once said. And then it's even greater that he can also have this still positive background and hope, I would say, still in this music.
And the whole album, or a lot of the album, was actually kind of dedicated to his brother, because his brother had just come back from Vietnam. So the song "What's Happening, Brother" is actually for his brother and kind of about his brother. And they had sat down together and discussed what had happened in Vietnam, and they both just broke down crying. And then he wrote that song kind of from the perspective of a brother coming back from Vietnam and asking, what's happening here? Why do I feel so out of place?
Yeah, it was totally shocking for also Marvin Gaye to hear what happened in Vietnam and what trauma his brother went through. And the other part was, as I read, that what happened to the brother when he came back. That he basically came back, as he thought, as a war hero, but in society, basically nothing changed. He was still a black man for most of the people there, and was hit by heavy racism, and these both topics had a very big influence on the album, as I also read. And sadly, also this is a quite current topic in the US with all the wars that happened after that. Another fact I found that had nothing to do with any kind of listening afterwards, and that is not by far as heavenly or important as the other one, is that he made this hat that he's wearing, I think this knitted toque on the recording, fashionable.
Toque.
So
it's a toque, Eric.
Toque. It's a toque. Oh, okay. Yeah, you have to.
That's a Canadian word.
The knit. Okay. He made the knit toque fashionable.
Really?
That was what the internet is saying, and the internet is never lying. Now that so maybe without Marvin Gaye, all the hipsters everywhere in the world were not running around with the toque like this.
One thing I found, this also had nothing to do with the listening, but it tied into our last episode. Do you know who did a cover of Mercy, Mercy Me?
Nirvana?
Nope. Eddie Vedder, The Strokes, and Josh Homme.
What?
It sounds horrible. It is so
all together?
All together. There's a cover of Mercy, Mercy Me by Eddie Vedder, The Strokes, and Josh Homme.
Well, that is a great group of musicians, and it's an odd choice for. And you listen to it. It sounds horrible.
I listened. It was not for me.
I still have to listen to it.
Yeah.
So, the artist of my favorite band, Pearl Jam, Strokes, also a great one. Okay. Is it on YouTube?
Spotify.
Oh, Spotify. Okay. I will find it. The question, what is the most favorite song of this album, is a question I cannot really raise for this album.
I had multiple favorites.
And I just think this album is such a concept thing. I just don't want to choose one. Well, the first song is The Gateway. Without it, it's the most important maybe. But for me, I cannot choose.
You have to choose one.
I have to choose
There
one.
can only
Okay.
be one.
There can only be one.
No.
Okay, then I cannot go with the first one again. So then, if I have to, then it's Mercy, Mercy Me. But it's because of the all over sound.
I'm going with What's Going On still. That's mine. But yeah, I'm basically the same. I can't really choose one. And with the with how much the first like 6 songs blend together, that's basically like one song. So I picked the first 6. What's Going On?
Which goes to the direction. It's an all over album, and What's Going On is, without that song it never happened, and it's one of the most important songs of all time. So I have to make another pick. It's What's Going On.
Changed your mind.
Yeah, change my mind in the show, but it's otherwise cannot go with anything else.
And how do you think this album would do nowadays?
Especially now, What's Going On would be everywhere. It is on one point because of the lyrics, and also it's all of his vibe. That's the other thing. You can play it in the radio just by sound. It's not like territorial pissings of Nirvana or something that we talked last time. You can hear it in the background, and you still have that feelings and the importance of the topics in your mind. So I would not be surprised if the next time we sit in the podcast, we look back and see that it's one of the most streamed songs right now, or if the video, or is the new video production is going up, or it's number 1 on Billboard again in the US. I would not be surprised at all.
I wouldn't be surprised if it all of a sudden got covered by like multiple artists.
Yes.
Even as like maybe as an initiative or something where they have like We Are the World style, get a bunch of artists together and do What's Going On.
Yeah, if you want to do something like this, that's the song to go for.
It should be done like that. Did you actually watch any of the videos?
Yeah, I watched
like the official videos.
No. So I thought there is not really an official one. Also, I didn't find where they thought it's officially. I watched the newer one that is maybe 1 or 2 years older that would also fit to today.
The one from 2019.
Yeah.
There was one made by Savannah Leaf in 2019 where she shot it in Detroit and Flint, Michigan.
Yeah, then I saw this.
Yeah. But that's the official video. They did, because back then there was no music videos.
Then I guess the chances are even quite higher that it will be used now. Yeah. Even more. The difference is, again, like we said last time, right now it will only be about this song, not the album, as people don't listen to albums anymore, I think.
I think so too.
But you never know. In retrospect, after we talked about Nevermind, Kendrick Lamar came to my mind, and he had concept albums that were also big hits, and that is not so long ago. So you never know.
I've never really listened to him.
Oh, he's great. Good Kid, Mad City from him. It's a fantastic album, and also the ones that came after. But this for me is the best one. But that's a topic for another time. So you agree that would be also a big hit if it would be released today?
I think it would be big. It actually, listening to the album actually made me wonder whatever happened to the protest song. Like the actual idea of a protest song back in the late 60s, early 70s happened all the time, or at least that's my feeling, is that there was tons of songs about injustice coming out then. And I can't think of any modern protest songs.
It goes to the same direction as we talked last time. It's an interesting thought. It's like with the Friday for Future movement that we thought, at least, that there's not really a soundtrack. And also in general, I think you're right. There's not, what is with the protest song? Or maybe there's just too much music and people getting numb of it. I don't know.
Or they get lost
Or
in
they
the.
or they get lost. That is another possibility. So musicians still talking about a lot of things, but there's not really the one hit that super strike out. Maybe because people are just anyway listening to the songs that they want to hear and stream it, and that's why it's not happening.
But if you look at what's going on, it's a major artist who made a protest song. Like Marvin was at the top of his game when this came out. It's not like he was an unknown singer who came out with an album and then it became a hit. He was already at the top. And then he said, this doesn't make sense for me, and wrote about it and sang about it.
That's true. Maybe the difference is if now as songs come out, I have to check that it's not something for radio stuff. Like it would be like if Jay-Z now is dropping a song about what's happening, and maybe it's because of the genre. I don't know, but I think it says more about society than about the music. I'm not sure about it.
I find it an interesting question.
It's a very good question. As you can hear, as I'm thinking about it, it's going to so many different directions. I really have to think about it. Who would be a good artist right now to write a song in that matter? You have somebody in mind?
Donald Glover.
That is true. He basically did a protest song with "This Is America" and the video.
Not as big of a hit.
No, not a big of a hit. That's maybe because there are not so many global one-time hits. But it's a great. Donald Glover. He's he's a super talented person.
Yeah, I just found it interesting thinking about that you don't see that as much nowadays, or I don't at least notice as much. I think a lot of the stuff just gets recycled.
True.
Is something happens and then people just start playing What's Going On by Marvin Gaye.
Yeah.
Because it's still relevant. That's the thing with the album, is that the music, like you said, the music is still good. Like you can put it on and it's not going to phase people where they're going to think this is an old album. You hear it and it's just good.
It's timeless music and unfortunately timeless lyrics.
Yeah.
That's true. Very true. So that goes also in the direction what aged the best for you?
I think the whole album aged very well. The music, the lyrics, everything is still relevant, especially the disco flute.
You're very excited about that one.
And for you, what do you find aged well or not well?
Well, what aged well is something I mentioned a couple of times before, is the flow itself. It's a constant flow state. I know I just also read a book about the flow state that is from 1991, so that's why I'm using it so often. But that's it sounds really like they're in the rhythm. They know what they're creating is something especially great. They channel or especially his dark moments in great art. I'm pretty sure they lost time or track of time and everything in that, and it's just a flow state that aged for me the best.
That was the thing with the Funk Brothers, though, was that when they started playing, they were also playing every night together in clubs. So they would get ideas while playing at the clubs and then just use them in the studio the next day.
Like the Beatles in Hamburg.
Yeah, that's another thing that doesn't exist today, is having a session band that just, maybe the Dap Kings, but they're kind of close to that. But that's the thing that's missing kind of nowadays. That's why the Motown sound can't be touched.
So they did what the Roots are able to do at the Jimmy Fallon show every night, but
exactly. They punch in.
Yeah. So they're just super, super professionals.
I think that is probably where this flow that you were talking about comes from, is you have this set of musicians who have been playing together for so long that it's just natural. They know what the one guy's going to do. When James Jamerson sets off with the bass line, the drums kick in and they know where to go. They just have the feeling.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Pretty sure that, and they were at their peak of their powers. I mean, at that time, how long did they jam and play together? For a decade.
Yeah. I think that's, for me, that might be, though, the flow of the album with the nonstop, how it's like an orchestral suite, is that for me would be one thing that didn't age well.
Oh, okay.
I think it still sounds fantastic. I love it. I think it sounds great. But nowadays, who's going to notice that on the album?
From that point, yeah.
Because we're in the era of, we listen to one song nowadays and then skip to the next artist or the next favorite song by that artist.
Yeah.
I don't think that many people will sit down and just listen to an album from front to back.
Today, if you would discover Marvin Gaye, you would click on his Spotify list and there would be, by algorithm, just a couple of tracks after each other in different direction, and you would not listen to the whole album. As mentioned, probably just to what's going on, and maybe Mercy Mercy Me. So you will, like, as we said with Nirvana, but even heavier impact, and this time, you would miss the whole concept.
I think that might be an issue we find with lots of the albums that we cover in our podcast, is they'll have these really nice flows and they sound fantastic all together, and that would not fly nowadays.
Maybe we have to make an own episode about that. Too many topics. What happened to the album?
Seriously.
So what aged the worst? I think nothing about the album that comes to my mind. And it's just what's happening in the world. And it's just sad that so many things are relevant today. The lyrics anyway, great. But yeah, that is just the sad part. I cannot come up with other things right now.
That didn't age well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a fantastic album. If any listeners have not listened to it yet, listen to the whole album from front to back. It's fantastic.
And I'm pretty sure it's even more fantastic when you keep all that facts in mind and go into the research itself. And when you watch the documentary about the Funk Brothers.
Yeah. So basically, it's much better to listen to the album after listening to our podcast.
Always.
What would you give the album out of 10?
No, it's 10. That's a clear 10. It could be released today. It will be a hit. It is a protest album, and it still gives hope. It is by super professional, as you pointed out, how great these musicians in the background are. It's one of the most talented musicians of all time. It was novel at the time. It's a 10 out of 10. No question. And it's one of the greatest songs ever. No discussion for me.
I'd probably give it a 10 as well. I'll give it a 9. It had some moments where I wasn't like on a right on. I just found it's like a 7.5-minute song. It took forever. There was points where I thought it was 2 songs, which makes sense, but
true.
I just thought some things turned too much into a little strange jazz session where I found it lost part of the concept on Right On, but that was just like one little moment.
Yeah, that's really just a little moment. And for me, totally the impact of it and the meaning of it has a very, very big part of that social impact, and that is so dominant for me.
Social impact, yeah, 10 out of 10.
And it's another example how you can discover timeless great music. Doesn't matter how long it exists. You don't have to grow up with it.
Yeah.
Of course I knew what's going on, but I never was going so deep into it and discovered this great album on a new way. It's never too late for great music. Never. That's why this album will always exist. That's why the Beatles will never die.
Had you listened to the whole album before?
No.
Your first listen?
No. I think not. And if I did, it was on the background. Not on purpose. I said, now I'm listening to the full album.
Yeah. Same for me. I listened to it recently, but it was in the background. Like I was doing stuff with the kids and didn't sit down and actually listen to the album before.
Yeah. Which anyway happens rarely.
Yeah.
I still managed to do it, but yeah, it didn't happen for this one. And last thought from my side was, okay, I want to listen to other Marvin Gaye's songs, and there's so many others. Ain't No Mountain High Enough is just great hit, for example.
Yeah.
Or other artists. One of my most favorite songs of all times is Curtis Mayfield, Move On Up, which I discovered on a sampler beginning of 2000s. I don't remember, and I love this song. Other artists, but yeah, in that time, it still get played in the Weser Stadium back in the days when there was in football still audience, and yeah, I was reminded to that too.
Back in the day, where people were allowed to go to sporting events.
Yeah. So last question from my side: is that for you R&B or is it soul? Is there any difference for you?
That's for me, soul.
Yeah. Same for me.
That's not R&B for
Same
me.
for me.
That's soul music.
I don't know the official description. Where's the border? But I listened to that and I talked with my brother about it and said, nah, for me, it feels like soul. So it just that it feels like this. It says a lot. But yeah, same for me. Some other last thoughts about this album?
It's just fantastic. I don't really have other last thoughts. That was kind of it. Amazing album to listen to. Interesting once you actually read about it, with the fact that this was the first Motown record to be done this way, how it wasn't going to be released. Thank goodness that it actually was released and made.
Yeah, it was very close not to released and made.
And too bad that Marvin wasn't around longer than April 1st, 1984.
Yeah. As mentioned, tragically deaf. It escalated at his home between his parents again, and he got between then, and his dad shot him twice, I think, and that was how he died.
Yeah. I actually saw an interview with Smokey Robinson where he said that he didn't believe it at first because it was April 1st. He thought, what kind of sick joke is this that this radio station is playing, saying that Marvin just died? Ooh. So he switched the radio station, and the next radio station said the same thing. So he actually called Anna Gordy, and as soon as she answered, he was like, yeah, it's Smokey. And she's like, yeah, it's true. I can't imagine that. That's hard.
That's super hard. We have to pick an album for the next time that where the frontman and the main person is not dying, or already died, or got shot.
Yeah. Speaking of the next album, we've done it this week where Barrick is picking an album, and I have no idea what it is. What are we listening to this next time around?
So, first information, the lead singer is still around. So, he's still alive.
Ah, you're cutting our morbid
yeah.
death
Very
reviews.
Important. No, the next album we're talking about is one of my favorite albums of all time. Very, very important for me personally. And I'm really excited to hear your takes about it. I have a couple of ones already. It will be Block Party's Silent Alarm.
Never heard it.
Whoa. Then it will be even better.
I don't think I've ever heard it.
It is one of the best albums of the last great rock time, beginning of the 2000s. They're from Great Britain. They came up with the last wave of bands like Arctic Monkeys, Franz Ferdinand. And it's a fantastic album. And I have so many memories about it. It's so many layers. And I'm very, very interested about your takes about it.
And no one's dead.
No one is dead now. Well,
that's also
the band still exists, but they changed a little bit of the team. So the last album was not good, but the first one is great. Or the first 3 to 4, I all of them liked. And in that time, it's one of the most influential albums for me. as a person. It was really a soundtrack for me at that time, and for a lot of my friends too.
I look forward to having listened.
Me too. So then I just have to say thank you for this time. That was a lot of fun, even when it also was sad in the process. Looking forward to the next episode.
Thanks for listening to the Modern Ear podcast. Subscribe to the podcast on your favorite listening platform, and please remember to rate, review, and share the show. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks for listening, and bye. Take care.